Hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm 32 years old, a nurse, a homeowner, and someone who used to believe that family meant everything. I worked overtime during the pandemic. I paid off my student loans. I saved like crazy. I never asked for anything. I thought that was love, showing up for the people who raised me. But all it took was one overheard sentence to rip the blindfold off my eyes. It happened on a Tuesday. I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift at the hospital. My feet were throbbing, my back hurt, but my spirit was light. That morning, I'd been called into the staff meeting and given something I never expected: recognition. A 15,000 bonus for leading the ICU through the hardest wave of the pandemic. I nearly cried when they handed me the check, not because of the money, but because for the first time in 3 years, someone actually saw how hard I'd been trying. So, naturally, the first people I thought of were my parents. I stopped by their house on my way home. I wasn't planning anything big, just wanted to share the moment. Maybe open a bottle of wine, maybe cook dinner together. That's who I was, always trying to make good memories with the people I loved. But fate had other plans. I used my spare key, walked inside like I'd done 100 times before. Their cars were in the driveway. I figured they were in the backyard or upstairs, so I headed toward the hallway, still clutching the envelope with the bonus check in my bag. That's when I heard it. Alexander's voice, my younger brother's, coming from behind their bedroom door. Then my father's voice, low but unmistakably serious. "Don't worry about the debt. We'll make your sister pay. She's never said no to family before." I froze, hand midair, breath caught, heart cracked. At that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit for 32 years. My family didn't love me for who I was. They loved me for what I could give. And this time, they were going to take everything. I didn't leave right away. I stood there like a statue, listening to the people I had sacrificed everything for, plotting how to make me the bank from my brother's mess. "She owes us. After everything we've done," my mom chimed in. Those words hit harder than any diagnosis I've ever had to deliver at work. I backed out of the hallway in silence, didn't slam the door, didn't cry. I just drove home. But the crying came later. That night, I sat at my kitchen table in scrubs still soaked with sweat, staring at the bonus check. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel proud. I felt used. It wasn't a one-time betrayal. It was just the first time they'd said it out loud. Because when I looked back, really looked, this had been going on forever. Alexander was the golden boy, born 3 years after me. Tall, charming, trouble. I was the responsible one. When he crashed Dad's truck at 16, they said, "Boys will be boys." When I brought home straight A's and volunteered at the clinic, they said, "Well, that's what's expected of you." When he dropped out of community college, they let him figure himself out. For 6 years on their couch, playing video games and burning through 3 part-time jobs, me, I put myself through nursing school, no help, no handouts, just grit. I never resented him for being the favorite. Not really. I thought I was above that. But now I saw it clearly. They weren't just enabling him. They were grooming me to clean up after him. And this time it wasn't a broken car or a bail bond. It was 88,000 in credit card debt from some crypto startup scam he'd dumped his life savings into. And they expected me to cover it because I was the responsible one. No, not this time. This time, they chose the wrong daughter. And I was going to show them exactly what that mistake would cost. The next morning, I woke up with clarity, not the tear-streaked kind. The surgical kind. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to confront them. No, I was going to let them walk straight into the trap. First, I deposited the bonus. Not a word to anyone. Then I went to the bank and printed a full statement of the joint mortgage I had been helping them pay off for the past 6 years. "Yes," I said, joint. "See, when Dad got laid off in 2017, I offered to sign the refinance on their house, just until things stabilized. Except things never did. They made minimum payments. I quietly covered the rest. To them, it was forgotten. To me, it was leverage, an accidental one, but powerful. I called the bank and scheduled a full review. There was a clause I'd forgotten about, a trigger clause that, under certain conditions, allowed one co-signer to initiate a buyout or even a forced sale. Then I called a lawyer. Not to sue, yet. Just to ask what would happen if I stopped paying and let the house go into default. The answer within 90 days. The bank would issue a foreclosure notice, and the house would go on the market. My parents had no idea how close they were to losing everything, and I had no intention of letting that happen. Not yet, because first I wanted them to ask. 3 days later, the phone call came, predictable, whiny, pathetic. Vanessa. Sweetheart, can we talk? It's about your brother. I let it go to voicemail. Then the texts came. We didn't mean to offend you. It was just, we're a family. Families help each other. I didn't respond. Let them sweat. By the end of the week, they showed up at my door. Mom with her sad eyes. Dad looking 10 years older. And my brother, of course, standing behind them like a lost child instead of a grown man who'd burned through 88,000 like it was play money. We're sorry, Mom said. We just thought maybe you could help again. I smiled. And that's when they should have known something was wrong. Because the old me would have been anxious, hurt, indecisive. But this me, I was calm? Too calm. Of course I'll help, I said sweetly. Let's talk again next week. I'll see what I can do. Then I closed the door. Because this time, I wasn't just going to refuse their request. I was going to teach them what it feels like to be left holding the consequences alone. 1 week later, I walked into the bank carrying a thick folder, detailed payment receipts dating back to 2017, itemized transfers, and a legal notice drafted by my attorney. I didn't need to scream. I just needed to sign, using a clause buried in the original refinance agreement, something most people overlook. I invoked my right to buy out their share of the mortgage. They had 30 days to come up with their portion, or be forced to sell the house. They couldn't. And they knew it. I didn't call the police. I didn't change the locks. I didn't even gloat. I just let the law do what the law was made for. 4 weeks later, a notice was stapled to the front door. This property is now undergoing valuation for pending sale. My mother called 4 times. I didn't pick up. My father emailed, subject line, "Can we please sit down and talk?" I replied with one sentence. I've been sitting down and talking for 6 years. Now I'm standing up. As for my brother, not a word. Maybe he was too busy scrolling on the iPad I bought him last Christmas, looking for somewhere new to live. The day the house officially went on the market, I watched from across the street. I never stepped inside. I didn't need to. I had spent a lifetime in that house, but I had never truly belonged in it. And now, it didn't belong to them either. The house sold for $685,000. Not bad for a neighborhood where the grass is always trimmed but the truth stay buried. After the mortgage was cleared, I walked away with a check for just over $212,000. More than money, it felt like closure. I didn't celebrate with champagne. I paid off the last of my own student loans. Then I booked a one-way ticket, not to escape but to reset. 3 months in Portugal, Lisbon, Porto, and then a quiet little town on the coast where no one knew my name. I lived in Lenin, read books I hadn't touched in years, and started journaling again, not about what had happened, but about who I was becoming. Back home, my phone stayed quiet. Not because they didn't try. My mother's Facebook messages grew increasingly performative. "Just thinking of you, sweetheart. Hope you're still finding yourself, Pa." I didn't respond. Because I wasn't lost. I was finally found. One evening, standing on the edge of a cliffside cafe in Algarve, watching the sun sink into the Atlantic, I whispered to no one, This is the first time I've ever felt like my life belongs to me." And it did. No guilt. No manipulation. No family IOUs dressed up as love. Just peace. And the promise of a life where I was no longer the family's safety net, but the architect of my own freedom. I had just returned to Chicago. It was late October, and the wind had that familiar bite that reminded you winter was coming whether you were ready or not. My suitcase sat half unpacked near the front door, but I didn't move. I was standing in the kitchen, one hand wrapped around a warm mug, the other holding my phone. One new voicemail. It was from my father. His voice, once so steady and sure, sounded smaller, slower. "Vanessa, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but something's happened. I need to talk to you. Please, call me when you can." That was all he said. But it wasn't what he said that got to me. It was the silence after. The long pause before he hung up, like he was waiting for me to respond even though he knew I couldn't. For days, I let the message sit there. I wasn't afraid of the conversation. I was afraid of what it might awaken in me. Guilt, anger, the need to rescue. I'd spent months untangling myself from those patterns. I wasn't sure I was strong enough to step back into that world, even for one phone call. But eventually, I called. He picked up on the first ring. His voice cracked. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't try to act like nothing had happened. He simply said, "I think I've lost your brother. And maybe I've lost you too." I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence do the talking for once. Then I said, "I'm here. But I'm not the same person I was before." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know. And maybe that's a good thing." The line went quiet again, but this time it felt different. Like maybe something was starting to heal. Not fix. Not forget. Just shift. And for the first time in a long time, I let that be enough. A week passed before I agreed to meet my father in person. We chose a neutral place. A quiet corner booth in a downtown diner we used to visit when I was in college. Back then, it was our place. A ritual after big exams, during holidays, or on the rare weekend I wasn't working. Now, sitting across from him, it felt like we were strangers pretending to play a memory. He looked older. Not just in the hairline or the posture, but in the way his eyes moved. Like someone who'd seen himself clearly for the first time and didn't like what he saw. "I owe you more than an apology," he said, not touching his coffee. "But I don't know what that looks like." His words landed awkwardly. A younger version of me would have rushed in with reassurance. Would have softened the edges, changed the subject, paid the emotional toll just to keep the peace. But that girl had left the table a long time ago, so I said nothing. I let him sit in it, in the discomfort, in the silence that felt earned. He sighed. "Your mother still thinks you're being dramatic. She's rewriting what happened. Says we were just talking, that you overreacted." I nodded slowly. That tracks. He didn't argue. But I know better now. He looked at me with a kind of sorrow that wasn't just about guilt. It was regret soaked in time. The realization that the damage wasn't sudden. It had been happening in slow motion for decades. "Vanessa," he said carefully, "I thought I was being a good father. I thought providing for Alexander, covering for him, was what love looked like. And I thought you didn't need anything." That sentence cracked something open in me. Not in an angry way, not even in a sad way. It was more like an answer I'd been unconsciously chasing my whole life. I didn't need anything. That's how they saw me. Reliable, strong, unshakable. The daughter who had it together. The one who could hold the weight, carry the load, never buckle. They had mistaken my strength for invincibility. And then they used that misbelief to excuse their neglect. I did need something. I said quietly, I needed someone to notice that I was carrying everything. That being the strong one was exhausting. He looked away. I see that now. I studied him. For a long time, he had been the man I wanted to impress. The one whose approval came in polite nods and unspoken expectations. And suddenly, I realized, I didn't need that anymore. I didn't need him to change who he was. I just needed him to stop asking me to carry his consequences. "I can't fix the past," he said. "No," I replied, "but you can stop pretending it didn't happen." That night, I drove home with the windows down. The air was cold, biting, but clear. And something in me felt lighter. Not because it was over, but because I had finally stopped trying to make it something it never was. I had stopped asking for a version of family that didn't exist, and I had started choosing myself instead. 3 days later, it came in the mail. No return address. Just my name, written in tight cursive across the envelope. I almost tossed it, thought it was junk or one of those fake checks wrapped in drama. But something about the handwriting stopped me. It was old-fashioned, familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. Inside was a single-page letter, folded 3 times. Cream paper, heavy and expensive. My hands started shaking halfway through the first sentence. It was from my mother. But it wasn't an apology. It wasn't even addressed directly to me. It was a copy of a letter she'd written to someone else. Someone named Elaine. I kept reading. Line by line, every word undercut years of truth I thought I understood. Elaine, you said Vanessa would be fine, that she wouldn't need much. You promised me she'd grow up strong, independent. That if we gave Alexander more, if we made room for him to thrive, she would never notice the difference. But she noticed, and now she's gone. You told me I could be the mother he needed without sacrificing her. That there was enough love to go around. But love doesn't look like silence. It doesn't look like choosing one child over the other in every hallway, every holiday, every decision that carved her out of the center of our family. I failed her. And I don't know how to make it right. I read it 3 times before I realized who Elaine was. A family counselor. Someone my parents had quietly seen. Once, when my brother had his second DUI and I was still in college, paying my own tuition while they funded his rehab, I called my father. He answered on the first ring. You got it, he said. Not a question. What is this? He exhaled. She wrote it years ago, after your graduation. Never sent it. I found it in her dresser drawer last month. Why send it now? Because I thought you deserved to know that she wasn't blind, just unwilling. I didn't speak. Couldn't. Because the part of me that had been screaming for acknowledgement had finally gotten it. But in a voice that wasn't even meant for me, and that hurt more than the silence. That letter written in private, hidden for years, meant she knew. She always knew. She watched the imbalance, the sacrifices I made, the nights I bit my tongue and swallowed my pride. And instead of stopping it, she rationalized it. She gambled on my resilience and cashed it in like currency. I hung up the phone without another word. That night, I stood by my kitchen window and stared at the city lights until the sky turned dark blue. And I made a decision. I wasn't going back, not to the expectations. Not to the roles they had written for me in the family playbook. I wasn't a supporting character in my own life anymore. I would write my own script. I would be the lead, and the story. It was just getting started. 2 weeks later, the next surprise came in the form of a pastel envelope. Thick cardstock, gold-embossed lettering, a tiny wax seal that made my teeth clench before I even opened it. A birthday invitation. From Alexander. I didn't even need to read it. The moment I saw his name, my heart dropped. Vanessa, we're having a small get-together for my 30th. Nothing fancy. Just close friends and family. Would love for you to be there. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just that smug assumption that I'd come running because that's what I used to do. Show up. Smile. Pretend. Pretend I wasn't the one who missed Christmases because he wasn't ready to talk. Pretend I hadn't paid Mom's credit card balance when his new startup flopped and he ghosted everyone for 4 months. Pretend he hadn't laughed with the rest of them when Dad handed him the deed to the beach house. Just to make sure it stays in the family. I held the card for a long time. It was ivory with navy trim. The kind of paper that said, legacy. Like the kind you send when you expect to have buildings named after you. I imagined Alexander had them custom made. Probably matched the damn cake. For a moment, I considered tearing it in half. But I didn't. Because something strange was happening in me. A tension I hadn't felt in years. Not fear. Not even anger. It was readiness. I'd built a life they didn't understand. A business they thought was a side hustle had become a figure success. I had clients who respected me, a partner who saw me, and friends who didn't measure my worth by how much I could tolerate. I wasn't the same woman who used to make their dysfunction her responsibility. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally strong enough to walk into that house, into his birthday party, and look them all in the eye. Not to be cruel, not to prove a point, but to let them see what they gave up when they chose him. Not to scream, but to be undeniable. I poured a glass of wine that night and set the invitation on the counter. Then I picked up my phone and sent one text to my best friend. "You still got that red dress from New Year's. I think I've got a party to crash." The night of the party, I stood across the street from the house I once called home. Same bricks, same white shutters, same uneven porch light that flickered every few seconds like it was too tired to keep pretending. But the driveway was different. Lined with luxury SUVs, designer sedans, valet signs like the house had put on a mask too. I took one last look at myself in the car window. Red dress, clean lines, no jewelry, just confidence, finally fitting like skin instead of armor. I walked up the drive alone. No one greeted me at the door. Typical. Inside, the music was low, the laughter high-pitched. Someone was already halfway through a champagne toast in the next room. The foyer still smelled like lemon polish and memory. Then I saw them, clustered near the bar, lit by the warm glow of curated comfort. Alexander stood at the center, of course. Surrounded, golden. He didn't see me right away. But Mom did. She stiffened. Her glass paused halfway to her lips, her smile flickered. But she didn't say a word. Neither did Dad. They were too practiced in keeping masks on. I walked past them like a ghost that had learned to haunt with posture alone. Vanessa. That voice, Alexander's, he finally noticed. The room quieted just slightly, like a needle skipping on vinyl. I turned. He was smiling, almost surprised. "You came." I nodded once. "You invited me." "Well, yeah, I didn't think you." He stopped. Because by then, people were watching, and I wasn't the little sister anymore. "You look different." We stood there 5 feet apart, years between us, the weight of everything unsaid pressing into the air. "Want a drink?" he offered. "Actually, I'll take a moment." And then I walked past him, through the kitchen, into the backyard, where the real power plays always happened. Because I wasn't here to smile and hug and pretend. I was here to be seen. And what none of them knew yet was that I had brought something with me. Not a speech, not a fight, proof. The rest was just timing. The backyard was strung with fairy lights, polished stone tiles, catered hors d'oeuvres, polite conversations about stocks, destination weddings, someone's third home in Aspen. I moved to the edge of the crowd, found the shadows near the garden wall. Quiet, watchful. In my hand a phone, in my chest, a storm. I had timed this perfectly, not for revenge, but for reality. Because somewhere along the way, they had rewritten me out of the family narrative. Turned me into the mistake, the burden, the girl who should have been grateful. But I hadn't come tonight to argue. I came to restore the record. I opened the folder on my phone. Not the version of the trust they gave me. The real one. The one Alexander didn't know I had. The one Dad had signed 2 years ago, naming me equal beneficiary. Before he changed his mind. Before he lost the paperwork and claimed the documents were never filed. Except they were. And I had the countersigned copies, the digital receipts, the legal review, all time-stamped. It had taken months, late nights, quiet lawyers, one very persistent paralegal with a conscience. But now, standing here, I realized something deeper. I wasn't just proving they'd stolen from me. I was proving they'd erased me. Because it was easier than respecting me. And I was done letting them. Across the yard, I saw Alexander step out, scanning the space. His eyes locked on mine. "Vanessa, can we talk?" I slipped the phone into my coat pocket. "Yes," I said. "We can." He started walking over, too casual, too late, and I stood still. Because he had no idea that everything was about to change. Not in a shout, not in a slap, but in a sentence. The kind you drop quietly into a conversation and never take back. He stopped just a few feet from me, hands stuffed in his pockets, wearing that same designer smirk he'd used since we were kids. The one that used to get him out of trouble. The one that once convinced me he had a soul worth saving. "Look," Alexander started, voice low. "I know things got a little tense." He glanced around to make sure no one was watching. Of course. Always concerned about optics. "I don't want tonight to be weird. Mom and Dad are still a little upset, but I told them you'd come around." I tilted my head slightly. "Come around to what?" He hesitated, just a blink, before recovering with a laugh. "You know, letting go of the whole betrayal narrative. We're family. We mess up, we fix it." He looked at me expectantly, like I was supposed to nod, forgive, absorb the guilt like a sponge, the same way I always had. But tonight wasn't about absorbing anything. It was about delivering the truth. So I reached into my coat, pulled out the folded legal document, and held it up between us. "You told them I was crazy," I said calmly. "That I imagined things. That I was obsessed with money. But what you didn't count on was me finding the original version of Dad's estate plan, the one you had them revoke behind my back." The smirk dropped from his face like a loose mask. "What is that?" he asked too quickly. "Proof. Signed. Notarized. Digital years ago. Equal beneficiaries. Until you convinced them to change it." His jaw tensed. "You're bluffing." "No," I said, voice steady. "You're unraveling." He reached for the paper. I pulled it back. "I already sent copies to my lawyer," I said, "and to the firm Dad used. This isn't about getting the money, Alexander. It's about making sure your version of the truth doesn't get to stand." I watched his face collapse in slow motion. He couldn't charm his way out of this one. Couldn't whine or manipulate or shout it down. For once, I had taken something he thought belonged to him by default. Control. He stepped back, angry, afraid, small. "I'll tell them you're blackmailing me," he spat. I smiled. "You already did. That was your first mistake." Because now, all the stories he'd spun were starting to contradict. The timelines didn't match. The lies had outlived their utility, and people were starting to ask questions. Not because I begged them to believe me, but because I stopped apologizing and started showing receipts. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sharp, alive. It pressed against us like air before a storm. Alexander stood frozen in the hallway, chest rising faster now. Not with anger, but panic. Because for the first time in his curated, inherited, perfectly manipulated life, he didn't know what came next, and I did. "You always thought the silence made you safe," I said quietly. "But it just made your lies echo louder." He opened his mouth to respond, probably to gaslight, to pivot, to spin, but footsteps interrupted us. Our mother appeared at the end of the hallway, expression brittle, voice clipped. "What's going on here?" I didn't even flinch. I held the paper out for her calmly. "Do you remember this?" I asked. She took it slowly, scanning the notarized estate document. I watched her pupils twitch, her lips part in recognition. She wasn't as good at hiding guilt as he was. "You knew," I said. "You let him do this. You let him push me out." Her throat worked to swallow words that didn't come. Alexander stepped between us like a shield. "Mom, don't. She's twisting things again." But she didn't look at him. She looked at me. And for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of what used to be maternal instinct. "I didn't want it to be this way," she whispered. I shook my head. "You wanted it quiet. You wanted me compliant." I could see the unraveling beginning, not just in Alexander, but in her. The roles they'd rehearsed for years were starting to crack under the weight of something they'd never accounted for. Me, refusing to disappear. Behind us, voices were rising in the dining room. Other family members, sensing the energy shift, drifting toward the hallway like moths to flame. Good. Let them witness it. Let them see who had been telling the truth all along. Because in that moment, I wasn't just the daughter who got pushed aside, the sister who got labeled difficult. I was the whistleblower, the survivor, the one holding the fuse in one hand and the match in the other. The hallway filled with footsteps, aunts, cousins, whispering, watching. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. Alexander did. He shifted his weight, backpedaling toward the study like he could still escape this, still wrangle control, still twist the narrative. But it was too late for control. Everyone should hear this, I said, louder now. The room stilled. I turned to face them, not with rage, but with the kind of calm that only comes after years of silence. The kind of calm you earn after being dismissed, excluded, lied to, and surviving anyway. This, I said, lifting the document, is the original estate letter from Dad. He named both of us as executors. But someone, I looked at Alexander, submitted a falsified version to the lawyers, one that cut me out completely, gasps, a few quiet, shocked murmurs. Our uncle stepped forward, confused. Is that true? Alex, Alexander's voice cracked. It's not what you think. No, I cut him off. Because it looks a lot like fraud, and if I hadn't requested the audit, if I hadn't forced the issue, none of you would have ever known. I would have been written out of the family legacy while smiling through Christmas dinner. People were turning, looking at him differently. The polished facade was slipping. His tie looked too tight now, his eyes darting, calculating, failing. Our mother tried to speak. She's making this dramatic. Am I said, my tone even sharper. Or have you just gotten too comfortable with me never fighting back? Silence again. Heavy now. And then someone clapped. It was our youngest cousin, the one who once told me I was the only one who listened to her when she cried at Grandpa's funeral. One clap, then another, and then, like breath returning to a stifled room, nods, murmurs, shifting tides. The truth was out. Alexander stood, shoulders hunched, surrounded by the very family he thought he controlled. His carefully crafted version of me, bitter, dramatic, emotional, shattered in real time. He finally spoke, voice quiet. What do you want? I took a step forward. To be treated like I was never disposable, I said. Then I dropped the real line, the one that changed everything. And I already filed with the state. You'll be hearing from the fraud division by Monday. By the time Monday arrived, the silence was loud. No apology, no phone call, just the slow churn of legal machinery waking up. One inquiry, one subpoena, one discovery request at a time. I sat at my small kitchen table, the same one I'd cried over 2 months ago, a cold cup of coffee beside my laptop. This time, I wasn't waiting for them to validate me. I was watching their castle crumble brick by brick. At 9:17 a.m., Alexander's lawyer emailed mine. The tone had changed. Gone were the confident declarations and veiled threats. Now it was negotiation, containment, damage control. They offered a partial settlement, a private apology, a revised estate proposal that acknowledged the oversight. They still didn't get it. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about identity, about history, about refusing to be edited out of your own story. My lawyer asked if I wanted to consider. I didn't hesitate. No deal. Let the investigation continue. Because for the first time, I wasn't just fighting for what was mine. I was fighting for the version of me they never wanted the world to see. The version that didn't back down. By Wednesday, local reporters had caught wind of the case, a quiet blip in the business section. Sibling executor dispute over alleged forged will. But in our world, the social circles where my mother and brother held court, that headline detonated like a bomb. The next day, a distant aunt called me. She'd never reached out before. I had no idea, sweetheart, she said softly. I always thought you were just distant. But maybe you were just excluded. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't mean something, but because I was done leaking pain for people who hadn't earned it. I said thank you, then ended the call, staring out the window as the city below me buzzed on like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The system that buried me had finally been forced to say my name, and for once, not as a footnote. The invitation came wrapped in the silence of guilt. It wasn't a formal letter, just a text. One line, from my mother, dinner, Just us, talk, no apology, no explanation, just those clipped words, as if we were acquaintances trying to settle a parking dispute. I stared at the screen for almost 10 minutes before responding. When and where? The reply came quickly. Friday, 7. At the house that used to be ours. The one I used to tiptoe through on Christmas mornings. The one where my name had once been carved into the wood of the garage door after a roller skate mishap. The house that had been stripped of my presence, one legal paper at a time. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Not my lawyer, not my friend, not even the neighbor who always peeked through her curtains whenever I left the apartment. I needed this moment to be mine. Friday came. I wore black, not out of mourning, but control. No makeup, no heels, just clarity. I pulled up to the familiar driveway with its cracked tiles and overwatered roses. The porch light was already on. The door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there like a portrait someone had kept in a dusty attic. Hair tight, posture impeccable, her expression unreadable. Come in. She said I did. The dining table was set, 2 plates, silverware, wine glasses, a roast chicken in the center, steaming quietly like it didn't know it was a prop. We didn't eat. She sat across from me, hands folded, eyes scanning for the version of me she remembered. But that girl, the one who begged to be loved properly, wasn't here anymore. You've caused quite a mess, she began. I tilted my head. I uncovered a lie. She sighed. Your brother was just trying to protect what your father built. No, I said. He was trying to protect what he believed he was entitled to. What you both believed I didn't deserve. Her eyes flickered, the mask cracking for half a breath. You don't understand how complicated these things are. No. You don't understand how simple they should be. I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp. You rewrote the truth, erased me. And when I pushed back, you called it betrayal. What Alexander did. That was the betrayal. Silence. Then, quietly, do you hate me? I wanted to. God, I had for so long. But what I felt wasn't hatred. It was colder, sadder. No, I whispered. I just don't believe you anymore. We sat in that stillness, mother and daughter. 2 ghosts sharing a dinner that would never be eaten. And then I stood. I didn't come here for closure. I came so you'd see me. One last time. Not as your disappointment. Not as your afterthought. But as the person who survived what you built. Her eyes were glassy now. You're stronger than I thought. No, I said. I was always this strong. You just never looked close enough to see it. I walked out without touching the food, without hugging her, without looking back. Because some endings don't need ceremony. They just need silence. And the strength to never walk back through that door again. The headlines didn't mention my name, and I preferred it that way. While the boardroom panicked and PR scrambled to rewrite the narrative of how Apex Logic had nearly compromised federal infrastructure, I was already 2 steps ahead, quietly onboarding with a new firm that valued foresight over politics. A place where silence meant focus, not fear. It was a startup in DC, called Halcyon Dynamics. Small, focused, sharp, they had no room for ego, only for execution. The founder, Ava Lang, greeted me with a handshake that meant business, not theater. We don't do old boys clubs here, she said flatly. I don't do second chances, I replied. Only new rules. She smiled. Good. You'll write them. In that first month I slept less, but not from anxiety. It was adrenaline, purpose. For the first time in years, I wasn't in survival mode. I was building something with my fingerprints on it, not buried under someone else's initials. I designed new architecture from the ground up, secure by design, auditable by default. No more backdoors hidden in expedited rollouts. No more dismissive tech leads explaining away breaches like weather reports. At Halcyon, I was the weather. But the real victory came slowly, in the inboxes. An email from a former Apex intern. You probably don't remember me, but I watched how they treated you. I remember how you handled it. Just wanted you to know, I stayed in tech because of that. Another from an old contractor. Your report saved my team. We'd built on that same SkyRX integration. We caught it in time. Thank you. Then one day a letter, handwritten, sloppy cursive, from my father. No return address. It read, I saw the news. Your mother won't say it, but I will. You were right. We were wrong. I don't know if you'll ever want to talk again. But if you do, I'll be here. I didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, I placed the letter in a drawer, not to forget, but to remind myself that sometimes the wind doesn't come as applause, it comes as peace, as silence with weight, as a moment when you no longer need to explain why you stood your ground. And that's the thing about truth. It doesn't beg to be believed. It waits. And when the noise fades, it's the only voice still speaking. It was a gray morning when I finally returned to the Apex building. Not for work, not for vengeance. Just curiosity. I parked in the same spot I'd parked in for 9 years. The oil stains still painted the concrete, the way rust scars an old blade. The building looked smaller somehow, less imposing, maybe because I no longer needed anything from it. I wasn't seeking validation. I wasn't chasing justice. I had already lived both. Inside, the lobby had changed, a new reception desk, a different abstract painting, just as hideous as the last, a shallow attempt at reinvention. But the rot wasn't in the walls. It had always been in the silence. I walked past without checking in. No one stopped me. A few new faces glanced up unbothered. I moved like a ghost, uninvited, unseen. But everywhere, and then I saw her, Marlene HR. She froze. Recognition flickered across her face like static. Emily, I didn't expect. I raised a hand gently. No fire. No accusation. Just calm. I'm not here to reopen anything. She nodded, confused but relieved. I took the elevator up, past my old floor, all the way to the rooftop deck I used to sneak away to during late-night audits. It was still there. Still ugly, still quiet. I stood by the ledge and looked out at the skyline, and I remembered. All those nights I stayed late, chasing integrity in a place that treated it like an expense line. All those moments I swallowed my pride, because I believed the system could work. All those days I carried the burden of being the one who noticed what no one wanted to see. And now I felt light, not because the world had changed, but because I had. I was no longer asking permission to lead. I was already leading. They fired me for being the firewall. So I became the system. And if you're watching this, if you're someone who sees what others ignore, who feels like your truth keeps getting buried under excuses, bureaucracy, and fear, listen carefully. You are not the problem. You are the proof. And sometimes, the only way to fix the system is to survive it. That night, after visiting the rooftop, I went home and opened a draft I'd started months ago. A letter, addressed to no one, meant for everyone. It wasn't a resignation or a confession. It was what I wish I'd said when I still believed someone would listen. I typed I tried. God, I tried. I stayed late. I double-checked everything. I wrote it in plain English. I kept my tone neutral. I followed the process. I gave them space to do the right thing. And in return, they branded me difficult. They called it overreaction. They said I didn't understand the big picture. But here's the part no one teaches you. The big picture doesn't matter if the foundation is cracked. And I saw the cracks. I saw the rot under the paint. The shortcuts masked as innovation. The ego coded into every line Dave approved. I saw it, and I spoke up, and they erased me. But here's the twist: I wasn't wrong. And being right, it was the sharpest blade I ever held. They tried to break me with silence. Now they listen because they're afraid not to. That letter never got printed, never got sent, but it stayed with me like a scar. And scars, they're not signs of weakness, they're proof you healed. 6 months passed, quietly at first, like the eye of a storm after everything had already been destroyed. There were no more emails from Dave, no more hallway glances from HR, no more calls from my parents pretending everything was fine, asking me to move on. They had all, in their own way, erased me. But here's the thing about erasure. When the dust settles, the space it leaves becomes yours to rebuild. In that space, I started to live. I joined a small startup in a nearby city, founded by two women who'd once walked away from the same kind of corporate games I had barely survived. They didn't care about optics. They cared about doing things right. They asked about my experience, not just my RA summe. They listened when I spoke. They gave credit where it was due. It was strange at first, being respected without having to beg for it, being trusted without conditions. I kept waiting for the trap, but it never came. On weekends, I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, teaching budgeting, career coaching, even helping write resumes. And every time I told someone, "You are not too much," I felt like I was telling a younger version of myself too. And then one day, unexpectedly, I got a package. No return address, no card. Inside was a thick envelope, a whistleblower report. Attached to it the official findings from a federal investigation. Anonymous sources had corroborated everything I'd written, everything I'd warned them about. My letter had started a chain reaction. The company was being sued. Dave was no longer CEO. And the line I'd buried in footnote 3 of my original memo, about investor manipulation, was now headline news in the business section. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the papers. It didn't feel like justice, not exactly. Not like in the movies. It felt quieter, like the final click of a puzzle piece falling into place. Later that night, I went back to the letter I never sent. I reread every line, and then I added one more. I am not what they did to me. I am what I chose to become after. And I chose peace, and purpose, and me. This story isn't just about being betrayed. It's about what happens after. About the strength it takes to walk away from a system that refuses to value you. And the power in realizing that you are not broken, they are. Emily's journey is a reminder to every person who's ever been ignored, underestimated, or labeled too much. Your voice matters. Your instincts matter. And your worth is never defined by the people who failed to recognize it. In a world that often punishes the truth, tellers and rewards the ones who play politics, being brave enough to speak up is a kind of quiet revolution. And sometimes, it only takes one person to break the silence so others can finally be heard. My message to you, if you're watching this and you've ever felt like Emily, unseen, unheard, or unjustly pushed aside, I want you to know you are not alone. What happened to you is not your fault, and you do not have to shrink yourself to survive. Use your story, share your truth, build something better, because healing isn't about revenge, it's about reclaiming yourself. If this story spoke to you, do 3 things. Leave a comment. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. Share this video, because someone out there needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that dig deep, speak truth, and remind us that we are stronger than what we survive. This is Telling Story with me, and we tell stories that fight back.